This is the introductory education programme for supporters of FRFI. Its structure serves its purpose by establishing the need for organisation in order to meet the crisis of capitalism and fight for socialism. This programme is in no way fixed and is open to suggestions. It remains therefore a work in progress. It is being discussed in open forums across the country where FRFI supporters are active. The oppression of women in capitalist society is not simply a result of ideas, prejudice or male chauvinism in the abstract. It has a material basis. Friedrich Engels described the historical establishment of private property in the way that societies are organised as the world historic defeat of women. Women have been oppressed in all class societies throughout history, and women's oppression under capitalism takes a particular form in relation to how social production is organised. We examine the social basis of women's oppression. We analyse the exploitative economic relations of modern capitalism that account for the dual oppression of women in the family and as workers. The engagement and leadership of women in the struggle for socialism is indispensable for the victory of any revolutionary movement, and women have had to battle against chauvinistic ideas in all societies, and even from within the socialist movement itself. The fight for the liberation of women has to be constant and at the heart of all struggles that socialists engage in. This first article is a speech given to the International Working Women's Day discussion panel on the 5th of March 2005 by our comrade Nikki Jameson.
I would like to bring the greetings of my organisation, the Revolutionary Communist Group, to this meeting in celebration of International Working Women's Day. This speech is in 3 parts. Firstly, I'm going to talk about specific struggles of working women in this country during the past 20 years. Secondly, I'm going to say something about women prisoners. And finally, I'm going to explain a little about the political stance of my organisation. The past 25 years in Britain, since that very unrevolutionary woman, Conservative leader Margaret Thatcher, came to power, have seen a huge change in the social structure of the country. Previously rich because of its imperialist plunder, the state could guarantee a sizable section of the working class lifelong employment, affordable housing and welfare provision. Thatcher announced that there was no such thing as society, only individuals, and made it clear she was declaring war on the working class. Since then, under both Conservative and Labour governments, the attack has continued unabated. Public services have been privatised and are unashamedly run for profit. Large sections of manufacturing industry have been destroyed. Trade union membership and organisation are now largely the domain of white-collar workers. Council housing has been sold off. Free health and education are progressively run down. Women workers have suffered disproportionately, as they have been more likely to be employed in temporary or part-time work, with fewer rights and less opportunity to organise. At the same time, as main carers for children and the elderly, women have been most affected by the running down of welfare provision and health services. Not surprisingly, many of the struggles during this period have been defensive, rearguard actions fighting to salvage something of the old order. However, they have also thrown up new forms of organisation and new alliances have been forged. These give us hope for the future. Among Thatcher's first targets were the Irish national liberation struggle and the British coal miners. In Ireland, women had been playing a key role for many years, both as fighters and as the organisers of relatives action committees. After the IRA unsuccessfully attempted to wipe Thatcher and her cabinet out in the Brighton bombing of 1984, 2 Irish women convicted of involvement in that attack were imprisoned in England and subjected to a form of gender-specific torture in the form of repeated strip searches. A principled campaign against this managed with difficulty to unite feminists and nationalists. The miners' strike of 1984-85 was a heroic struggle against the government's drive to close pits and privatise the industry. Although the miners themselves were exclusively male, women from mining communities flocked to picket the pits and were at the forefront of the organisation of solidarity with the strikers. Free from the restricting influence of traditional trade union organisation, the miners' wives made links with all those offering solidarity. They visited Belfast and understood how mining villages now under siege from the police were similar to Republican areas occupied by the British Army. They joined forces with pacifist women, camped outside the US's military bases in the UK at Greenham, who in turn learnt from the miners' wives about class struggle. The miners were defeated, sold out by the Labour Party and trade union movement. But the unity forged by the miners' wives is part of our legacy for any struggle built in the future. In 1992 to 1993, 19 workers, mainly Asian women, were on strike for a year at Burnsel's electroplating metal factory in Birmingham, demanding union recognition, health and safety measures, equal pay for women, and a reduction in their working week, which with compulsory overtime averaged 55 to 65 hours. The strike attracted solidarity from anarchists, communists, women's activists, and anti-racists who formed 3 solidarity groups. However, the union, the GMB, although formally supportive, insisted the fight be limited to small pickets and an industrial tribunal case. It opposed rallies, marches, and the very existence of a support group that linked the industrial struggle of the Burnsell workers to the multi-layered oppression the majority of them faced as immigrant women workers in Britain. Ultimately, the union sabotaged the campaign, worked with the police to prevent a march going ahead, and sold out the strike. The lessons from that episode were bitter ones. Since that strike, there have been other similar struggles led by women workers, the Hillingdon hospital cleaners, the Thameside care workers, for example. It has become clear that the old alliances with what is left of the official trade union movement have little to offer those who take a brave stance against privatisation and casualisation. I want to turn now to a very different aspect of women's situation in Britain. We are hearing today about the bravery of the Turkish women political prisoners, and we are sending solidarity cards to women political prisoners in various countries. I want to talk now about Britain's non-political women prisoners. I want us to understand that in the situation that I have described, in which the poverty gap is widening and society becoming more fragmented, the women who fill the jails here today, although far from being conscious political prisoners, are undoubtedly the prisoners of bourgeois politics. This country has the highest prison population in Western Europe. Although women make up just over 6% of the total, their imprisonment has nearly tripled during the past 15 years. At any one time, there are approximately 4,500 women in prison in England and Wales. Scotland and the occupied north of Ireland are counted separately. Over half of women prisoners have children under 16. 8,000 children every year have their living arrangements disrupted by their mother being imprisoned. Women's imprisonment attacks working-class families and communities. Approximately a third of women prisoners are not British citizens. Many have been arrested on entry for drug importation or passport violations. They face deportation as well as imprisonment. Their situation graphically demonstrates the interrelationship between class, gender, and racial oppression. The rate of suicide and self-harm among women prisoners is very high. Last year, 15 women took their own lives. Pauline Campbell, the mother of one young girl who died in 2003, has begun a campaign to highlight the situation and has been organising demonstrations outside women's prisons. There is an urgent need for the political movement not to leave such campaigns to liberals and lawyers, but to become involved, pointing out how class, race and gender oppression are linked. Women who die needlessly in British prisons are our disappeared. A principled struggle in their memory and in solidarity with women in prison would be a significant step. The Revolutionary Communist Group is a Marxist-Leninist organisation that was founded in 1974. In 1979, we launched our newspaper, Fight Racism, Fight Imperialism. We called the paper by that title to make the point that as Britain is an imperialist nation which lives off plundering oppressed nations, it is impossible to fight racism here without opposing imperialism internationally. We put this into practice by linking campaigning in solidarity with movements for national liberation, at that time in Ireland and South Africa, later in Kurdistan, today in Palestine, with a struggle against racism in Britain. We take a similar approach on the question of women's emancipation, arguing that without a struggle against capitalism and imperialism, women cannot be liberated. Today, one of the main activities that the RCG is involved in is in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, a revolution that we believe illustrates in practice how it is possible to build socialism. In 1996, our comrades interviewed Assata Shakur, a former member of the revolutionary US Black Panther Party. Assata said that, quote, "You cannot wipe out racism or sexism until you have some kind of system that guarantees basic human rights and food and shelter." End quote. This does not mean, as some Trotskyist political groups have said in the past, that the struggle against women's oppression or the struggle against racism should somehow be put on hold, made to wait until after the revolution. Such groups contend that fighting for women's rights here and now is somehow a bourgeois distraction or deviation from the class struggle. Instead, what it means is that the struggle for working class emancipation must always include the struggle against women's oppression and the struggle against racism. They cannot be separated from it. Women's oppression under capitalism is manifested both through inequality in the workplace and inequality in the home. Women's role is both that of servicing the labour power that capitalism thrives off by caring unpaid for our husbands and sons so they can work, and that of a reserve army of cheap labour so that we too can be called upon to work as capitalism dictates. Our demands as women workers have to address both these areas. We struggle, therefore, both for equal pay and employment and for better childcare provision, access to contraception and free abortion on demand. I'd like to end on an international and historical note with a quote from Soviet women's leader Alexandra Kollontai in 1909. The more aware amongst proletarian women realise that neither political nor judicial equality can solve the women's question in all its aspects. While women are compelled to sell their labour force and bear the yoke of capitalism, they cannot become the free and independent persons, wives who choose their husbands exclusively on the dictates of the heart, and mothers who can look without fear to the futures of their children. The ultimate objective of the proletarian woman is the destruction of the old antagonistic class-based world and the construction of a new and better world in which the exploitation of man by man will have become impossible.
This last article, Women on the Frontline of Resistance to Austerity, is from FRFI issue 244, first published in April 2015. The capitalist parties are committed to continuing austerity, and working class women will continue to suffer the most. The 5 years since the last general election have seen attacks on work, benefits, housing, services and childcare. Resistance has, however, been slowly building, and women are leading the way in organising themselves and their communities to fight back. Rachel Francis reports. The increasing number of women in work has been accompanied by an even steeper increase in the number of poorly paid, insecure contracts. Women make up 54% of temporary workers and 55% of zero-hour contract workers, despite making up only 47% of workers overall. More women work part-time than men, as they are increasingly unable to find full-time employment, and earn 38% less than men on these contracts. The number of young women, aged 18 to 24, in employment plummeted at the onset of the recession and has not recovered. It currently stands at 59%. Those in more traditionally secure employment are worse off. Since 2011, women working as nurses and primary school teachers have seen a 7% pay cut in real terms, care workers have lost 6%, and retail workers 5%. Worsening pay and conditions look set to continue as public services are taken over by private companies. Those in work are punished for having children. Women with children earn less than women without, a pay gap that increases with each subsequent child. Despite increasing inequality, legal challenges have fallen dramatically since employment tribunal fees of £1,200 were introduced in 2013. Since then, there have been 84% fewer equal pay claims, 81% fewer sex discrimination claims, and 26% fewer pregnancy dismissal claims. Women who rely on benefits, both in and out of work, are some of the hardest hit. There has been a significant rise in benefit sanctions against single parents, from £200 a month in 2008 to £5,000 in 2014. 92% of single parents are women. Of the £26 billion that has been extorted from tax and benefit reform since 2010, £22 billion has been taken from women, a total of 85%. The erosion of women's financial security results in potentially devastating dependency. Universal credit perpetuates the possibility of financial abuse, as money meant for a household will be paid into one bank account. Women's Aid have interviewed women who explain the devastation this will have on their lives. Quote, "He'll wake up one morning with £1,500 in his bank account and piss off with it, leaving us with nothing for weeks. Disabled women are twice as likely to face this abuse." Shrinking public services have a significant impact on women, with public spaces and provision often the only limited relief from the isolation of caring for children. Childcare remains simply unaffordable. In the past 5 years, the cost of a part-time nursery place for a child under 2 increased by 33%. Children's centres designed to provide support for those most in need have faced sustained attacks since the removal of the funding ring fence in 2011. They faced a 20% cut in spending over the last year, and over a third of centres are at risk this year. Others have reduced opening hours and provisions. Over half have stopped providing on-site childcare, and 20% have started charging for some services. Childcare has been a focus for the main parties in the run-up to the general election, and used to divide those they see as deserving working families from those they decide are not. Universal free childcare is, of course, never mentioned. Women are still providing the vast majority of care at home, alongside difficult work conditions. Women in the EU spend an average of 26 hours per week on home and care activities, compared with 9 hours for men. The reduction in support will only increase the burden placed on women who cannot pay for full childcare. Women make up 50% of housing benefit claimants, with men making up to 30% and couples the remaining 20%. Accordingly, women have lost $2.3 billion worth of housing benefit compared with a loss of $1.5 billion for men. The bedroom tax affects 34,000 single women alongside 160,000 single men and 160,000 couples. The benefit cap has been found to disproportionately affect women with large families. Women are at the sharp end of all housing-related changes. Councils across London are consistently trying to force women and children out of London to where rents are cheaper. In addition to the everyday violence inflicted by the government and its cuts, support for women facing domestic violence has also been severely reduced. 2013 saw the scrapping of the crisis loans and community care grants, some of the very limited support women can receive when fleeing violence. Local council funding for housing groups considered vulnerable, including these women and children in need, has fallen by an average of 45%. While resistance since the recession and last general election has been desperately lacking, community campaigns have now started to grow following persistent organising and activity. Working class women are leading resistance in the campaigns of Focus E15, New Era, Our West Hendon, Sweets Way and the Aylesbury Estate. It is predominantly women leading the Newcastle Parents Against Cuts campaign to save Sure Start centres. The Three Cosses campaign, which began fighting for the living wage, holidays, sick pay and pensions for university cleaners and has become much more, has been led by women. It is campaigning against maternity discrimination for an outsourced cleaner dismissed because of her condition, and is currently leading a Three Cosses Women Go to Tribunal campaign. Crucial to its resistance has been exposing the despicable actions of Unison, who have tried to destroy the campaign, even using the police to attack the campaign, which you can see on facebook.com/3COSA, C-O-S-A. Those who will defend the capitalist parties offer nothing for working class women. Instead, working class women are organising in local communities, using everything at their disposal, because there is no alternative. Rather than look to the ballot box, it is time to look to vibrant campaigns instead and continue the long history of working class people organising themselves to build real democracy and solutions. Women are increasingly realising the words of revolutionary Assata Shakur, "A woman's place is in the struggle." Again, thank you so much for listening, and for more FRFI articles, please visit our website revolutionarycommunists.org or frfi.co.uk. And please don't hesitate to get in touch about joining or finding out about our open public meetings across the country.